Welcome to Baseball, Boobs, and the Babe, a collection of more than 60 true stories from our years of owning one of the nation's best-known sports card shops. For more than 30 years, Debbie and I owned Nick's Sports Cards in Dallas, Texas. During those years, thousands of people walked through our front door. Collectors and kids, professional athletes, millionaires, con artists, and people who became lifelong friends. Some stayed for only a few minutes. Others became part of our lives for decades. Every one of them had a story. Many of them left us with lessons they never intended to teach. I'm Nick Redwine, also known as G-Dad. Welcome to our stories. One day I was telling one of these stories when someone looked at me and said, "Nick, you need to write a book." That simple suggestion eventually became Baseball, Boobs, and the Babe. Now I'm bringing those stories to YouTube so our grandchildren will always know a little more about their grandparents, G-Dad and Grandma Debbie, the remarkable people who crossed our path, and the life lessons those people unknowingly left behind. My hope is that these stories will make you laugh, make you think, and perhaps even inspire you to preserve your own family's stories before they're lost to time. After all, the greatest inheritance we can leave our families isn't always money or possessions. Sometimes, it's our stories. Story number 10. They have such beautifully damaged skin. We owe this story to one of the most eccentric customers we ever had. Debbie is with us today because of him. During the 30 years we owned Nick's Sports Cards, thousands of people walked through our doors. They came from every profession and every walk of life. Many were unforgettable characters. But none of them came close to George. George first walked into our store during the technology boom of the late 1990s. He was in his late 40s and worked for one of Dallas's high-tech companies. Then the tech bubble burst. His company folded like a lawn chair, and suddenly we had an unemployed hockey collector hanging around our shop almost every day. Fortunately for us, he also spent plenty of money. It didn't take long to realize George was brilliant and different. Many conversations started with me trying to bring George back down to earth so I could understand what he was talking about. He might open a pack of hockey cards and casually say, "St. Thomas Aquinas's concerns resemble those of Aristotle regarding their focus on the moral, not the material, results of economic behavior." That was George. He was always ready to debate whatever happened to be on his mind. George grew up in Alabama and earned a PhD in linguistics from the University of Alabama. Linguistics is the scientific study of language and its structure. Later we learned he had worked for the government because he spoke fluent Russian. Before long, George and I became our own debate team. We argued about philosophy, history, religion, politics, and just about everything else imaginable. George had no family in Texas. His only close relative was his 85-year-old mother, Mrs. Minnie, who still lived in Alabama. One day George casually told us, "My mother raised the band Alabama." I'm sure the expression on my face said I didn't believe a word of it. George smiled and said, "Anything Mrs. Minnie wanted, Mrs. Minnie got." About 6 weeks later, UPS delivered a package unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was nearly 4 feet long, about 2 feet wide, and only a few inches thick. I hadn't ordered anything remotely that size. My first instinct was to refuse the delivery because businesses sometimes receive unordered merchandise followed by an invoice. We were always careful, but curiosity won. I signed for it, opened the box, and inside was a brand new electric guitar autographed by every member of Alabama. A few days later, George walked into the store wearing a grin from ear to ear. He asked, "Did you get the guitar?" I thanked him for the incredible gift. George just smiled and reminded me, "I told you. Anything Mrs. Minnie wanted, Mrs. Minnie got." After losing his job, George started writing computer books. Ironically, he had severe dyslexia. I've often wondered how someone with dyslexia earned a PhD, much less wrote technical books. At the time, our son Justin was majoring in computer science. He worked full-time, was married, had a young daughter, and drove from Oklahoma City to Dallas every weekend to attend college. He did that 52 weeks in a row. Despite his schedule, Justin agreed to proofread George's books before they went to the publisher. One day, George handed me another manuscript and asked if I'd give it to Justin. I told him Justin was extremely busy, but promised he'd get to it as soon as he could. Unfortunately, I chose the wrong words. George took offense. He walked out, and we didn't see him again for several years. Then one day, George came back. The moment he walked through the door, I knew something was terribly wrong. I asked George, "What's wrong with you?" He looked at me and quietly said, "I have stage 4 melanoma and I have 6 months to live." That kind of announcement knocks the wind right out of you. Still trying to process what I just heard, I finally asked, "What can we do?" George said there wasn't much anyone could do. Then he added something I'll never forget. "I'm thankful to have you and Debbie in my life." Coming from someone we hadn't seen in years. Those words meant a great deal. George had no family in Texas. No close friends. So Debbie and I started taking him to dinner. We invited him to our house. And once again, the debates began. We talked for hours about everything imaginable. One day I even asked him what he thought dying would be like. George smiled and said, "I'm about to discover the answer to the mystery of death." Eventually, George invited us to his apartment. Calling him a collector would have been an understatement. He was also a hoarder. There was almost no furniture. Instead, there were narrow walking paths winding through towering stacks of hockey cards, comic book artwork, and enough classical CDs to fill a music store. As the months passed, George became weaker. Eventually, he was admitted to Dallas's Deadman Hospital. I've always thought that was a terrible name for a hospital. I don't care who donated the money. It's just not a comforting name. At the time, I was teaching college only a few blocks away. Every Monday and Wednesday after class, I'd stop by to visit George. Sometimes I'd bring him a hamburger. Sometimes a chocolate malt. Debbie and I visited together on weekends. Then one afternoon I arrived after class. And George was gone. After asking around, someone finally told me he'd been transferred to a nursing home a few miles away. I tracked him down. It was one of the saddest places I'd ever seen. They had George lying in a bed, parked in the corner of a hallway. I complained, but because I wasn't family, no one paid much attention. By then, George was unconscious. I never got to say goodbye. He died a few days later. Before he passed away, George contacted an old high school friend. He asked him to return everything he owned to Alabama for his mother. A few weeks after George died, Mrs. Minnie called me. She told me the friend had placed George's belongings in a storage building, then started selling them piece by piece, keeping the money for himself. She asked if I would come to Alabama, recover George's hockey collection, and sell it for her. At the time, I was working 10-hour days in the store while also teaching college. Looking back, I made the wrong decision. I didn't think I could leave the business for several days. And I certainly didn't want to get into a legal or physical confrontation with George's old friend, so I declined. I've regretted that decision ever since. Not because of the money, because it was George. George owned the finest hockey collection I'd ever seen. Vintage cards, rookie cards, autographs, Hall of Famers. He had even traveled to Canada to find many of his treasures. It truly was an incredible collection. George died around Christmas. The following January, I made an offhand comment to Debbie. I said it probably wouldn't hurt for both of us to have our skin checked. We had grown up in Oklahoma. We loved being outside. And after watching George die from melanoma, it just seemed like the right thing to do. Our neighbor Janet worked for a dermatologist. Debbie called to schedule appointments. The first opening was 3 months away. That was fine with us. We weren't in a hurry. Then just a few days later, Janet called. She said, "I can get both of you in today." I went first. The dermatologist scolded me for spending too much time in the sun, then sent me home. Then it was Debbie's turn. The doctor removed 2 tiny moles. The very next day she called. Both were melanoma. Debbie immediately met with a surgeon. If you've never dealt with melanoma surgery, it isn't a simple scrape or quick removal. The surgeons cut deep. For something no bigger than a pinhead, they may remove an area as long, wide, and deep as your thumb. It's serious surgery. Because of George, Debbie's melanoma was found early. The surgeons removed it all. She returned every 3 months for skin checks, then every 6 months. Years later, after we sold the store and retired, I moved to Tulsa. 2 days before Debbie joined me, she had one final appointment with her dermatologist in Dallas. The doctor found another suspicious mole. It was melanoma again. They removed it the very next day. Debbie drove to Tulsa 2 days later, healthy and cancer-free. Thanks to George, Debbie is still with us today. We both avoid the sun whenever we can. And every time we see someone with a deep tan, one of us always smiles and says they have such beautifully damaged skin. People often ask me what happened to the autographed Alabama guitar. We donated it to charity. But George gave us something far more valuable than a guitar. He unknowingly helped save Debbie's life. And that's a gift we'll never forget. Before you go, if you enjoyed today's story, I hope you'll subscribe and join us as we continue sharing all 60 stories from baseball, Boobs, and the Babe. Every one of these stories is true. Some are funny, some are heartbreaking, some changed our lives forever. But every one of them taught us something worth passing on. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us today. I hope George's story reminds you that we never really know how our lives will touch someone else's. Next time, we'll share one of the most unexpected stories in the entire collection. Story number 11, Our Jewish Family. It's the true story of a kid from Oklahoma who was raised Southern Baptist. Then opened a sports card store in the heart of Jewish Dallas. We knew almost nothing about the Jewish faith, its traditions, or its culture. What happened next changed our lives forever. I hope you'll join us. Until then, take care of yourself, and remember that even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's life forever. I'm Nick Redwine, also known as G-Dad. I'll see you in our next story.